Hiya, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me. This is actually part 2 of the video where in part 1 we created the stenciled backgrounds and we went from basic to a bit more sophisticated. So today I'm going to take those backgrounds and make them into cards. Now I started here and forgot that I wasn't filming, so I have already die cut straight into the middle of this one here. This is the one where we did the pink background ink smushing, and then we did the stencil shifting with 2 different colors on top. Now I am starting off with a card base here, and this is a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base. And I'm coming back in with the exact same 2 colours that I used in the inking, and that is the mustard seed and spiced marmalade, so just a yellow and an orange distress oxide inks, the exact same ones that I used. I'm adding a tiny little bit of water, and then I'm just going to add some ink splashes to the background of my card. Now some of this is going to be covered up, so I'm not too worried about what this looks like, but it does add a little bit more interest in the background without it kind of taking over. I didn't want the background to be super plain. You could also add a little bit of just white embossing onto your background, or you could run it through an embossing machine. You could have an embossed panel, but I decided to go with the same coordinating colors for ink splashes, so you can see that everything matches up there. However, if I just did this again, I felt like it was just a little too plain, so I am bringing in this patterned paper pack, and this is the Best of You. This is quite cool because it's all kind of like textured materials. It feels like it's, you know, it looks like it's burlap that it's all written on, but it's actually just paper, of course. So I did think that these words could be kind of cool, the written background, the text background, but there are lots in here that I definitely could have used. And then I saw that there was a piece there that I had clearly used for something else, and I thought that that worked perfectly fine without having to cut up another piece. So I'm going to put those aside for just a minute, and I have an oval die here. This is from the Hero Arts Infinity Ovals die set, and I am just going to cut this out of some plain white cardstock, but it is too big for what I need, so I'm going to come back in with the exact same oval, shift it over a little bit, and this way it will make my oval a little bit smaller for the sentiment that I want to put on the front. Then with the sentiment here, I'm using this one from the Lily collection, and there's heaps of different sentiments in here that would fit nicely on our little tag that we have created. Of course, you could use any shaped tag and any sentiment at all to go on a card like this. But this one in particular, I needed the Just For You little sentiment down there. This was going to a really special friend of mine. So as I said, lots of these different ones fit on here. And I do love the nice wide range of sentiments that are in this little stamp set. I've used it lots and lots of times before, and I love to get really good mileage out of my stamp sets. So I'm going to stamp this on in some VersaFine Onyx black ink, and that way it will stand out really nicely from all those colors that we have going on in the background. So just stamp it down. This is a pigment ink and it stamps beautifully and crisp, so you do need to remember to either let it dry or heat set it so that you don't smudge it. I'm going to pop that panel down there just with some liquid glue. The liquid glue that I like using is the Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish, and I buy it in the bottles and then I pop it into those little glue containers. Here I have some burlap ribbon, and this is just a little cheat because I don't have the little strings that I needed. So if you cut a little bit off the end, that kind of trims off all the plastic things that hold it together, and then you can pull off all of the individual strands of this twine, and that saves me having to have a stash of twine as well. Then I'm going to pop a little bit of foam tape just to pop up that tag there, the banner, and make sure it just stands off the page just a little bit. I am currently using some really sticky foam tape. I have completely run out of all foam tape in my stash apart from this tiny little roll, so I desperately need to order some more. And then with the twine that we created earlier on, I am just going to make a nice gorgeous little bow. I'm using about 3 or so strands just so it's kind of a nice full little bow there. And again, you could add whatever you want here. You could have some little white foliage die cuts coming out from behind the sentiment, or you could just add a couple of little gems or a couple of little paper flowers or something like that. Anything would look really nice. I am just popping up the right hand side with a couple of foam squares so that it sits nice and evenly on the card front, and then the little twine bow will go down the side. Now I am just using the matte medium that's in here because this is a really strong glue, and I'm just going to sit something on top of it so that it dries in place. Then when I was nearly finished, I saw that tiny little scrap in the top right hand corner, and I thought, yeah, actually I'm going to pop that on the inside. I do like adding these tiny little touches. I do not like anything bulky and overwhelming on the inside of my cards, but I often stamp a couple of little verses. I have a couple of stamp sets that in particular that I kind of reach for to stamp the inside of cards. But that is card number 1 finished from our backgrounds. And I know it kind of feels like we are speeding through. I do apologize, but I just wanted to get a few cards in, a couple of cards in this video, and not make it too long at all. So here is the 4th version of the stenciling that we did, and it has some really nice dimension. We colored the stencil paste to go on the front, and we did some ink smushing in the background, and we actually used the shifter technique for the stencil as well. I am going to add a little bit more color to these just to give the texture paste some dimension, and I am adding the same spiced marmalade color, so that's the same color that we actually used to color the stencil paste. However, obviously it went lighter because the stencil paste was white to begin with, and I'm just using a finger dauber to add the ink on top. You will probably need to heat set this. That's what I did anyhow, to make sure that this dried on the card nicely. Then, just because the edges of that stencil are there, this is the Tim Holtz lace stencil that I used to create this pattern. Then I'm going to cut the edges off, and this one I am using a button on the front. So this is a stash that I got a long time ago. I think I got it from Spotlight here in New Zealand, and I think they may still sell them as well in those packages of buttons, but I'm sure you will have some lying around. Then I'm taking the Dainty Blossoms. This is a set from Pink Fresh Studio, but any dainty dies that you have, foliage dies, will work perfectly here. Or if you didn't have that, even just white strips of ribbon or paper, or get creative and we can pop something to go behind. It doesn't have to be the little foliage dies. But I have popped up this main panel on some foam tape, and then I'm popping it down on a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base, and you can see it's got a little bit of dimension there. Then these die cuts here are too big for what I need, which is fine, so I am just going to cut pretty much all of these down, and I'm just creating a nice big cluster that is going to go behind my buttons. So I kind of lay it all out and get an idea of how I want everything to go. And again, as I said, you could use anything behind here. It doesn't have to be die cuts at all. You could even just have kind of a nice big circular mandala die cut would go lovely behind it. Just anything would work well. I'm adding a big kind of glob there of liquid glue. That is the Ranger Multi-Medium, and that way I know that this will dry really nice and strong. I know that nothing is going to escape once this is dried, and I know that the button is going to stay on the front really secure, which is important to me. So I just kind of have a play around. There's no real rhyme or reason. Just make sure that I have a nice even coverage going all around in a kind of circular fashion. And then when I got the button that I picked out, I made sure I kind of used the slightly bigger one. I felt like the smaller one was just a little bit too little, and I wanted to cover up all that kind of mess that was there in the middle. Then I'm threading through some of that same twine that we cut off the burlap ribbon before. And then I will just tie a double knot on the back of the ribbon, and then with a few more of those pieces I'm kind of just folding them in half and then making some extra little bits of twirls and swirls of that burlap twine that will go behind the button as well. I do want to make sure there isn't too much more bulk to my card because I already have it popped up on foam tape, and then I am popping a button on there as well. So this might be one of those cards that I hand deliver, but instead of using a real button you could always die cut one, and that would make it not quite so bulky, but it's up to you. So there are just a couple more things I would like to do to this card. One is I just felt like those bits of sprigs there were poking out a little bit too far, so I gently pull them out and cut a little bit off and then pop them back in. I do need to give that glue a little bit of time to dry, but I am liking the way that this card looks so far. I do need to add on a sentiment, and again, using this little LDRS set that I've shown lots, I have a whole lot of these cut off to the side, which is super handy. I'm really liking this at the moment. It makes it kind of cuts out a whole step of my card making, which is good. And then this is your one of a kind, and I will pop that just down the bottom. And then just as a little added finishing touch, I'm going to add some white Nouveau drops and just a couple around the place in between the pattern, and it kind of breaks up the orange and yellow of that pattern. But again, you could also use like a gold or a silver if you wanted to add in a little bit more to break it up. But that is the second card complete for today. This one has lots of texture and dimension. The texture paste is kind of hard to pick up how textured it is, but I really love the final look of both of these cards. Given that they use the same stencil and the exact same colours, I think that they didn't turn out too identical. I hope you've enjoyed these couple of videos on how to take your stenciling further in your card making, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks, bye!